This is one of those evenings that I wish could just hang around for a little bit longer than the hour and a half that we're going to be able to give it the honor of having this evening. I am so grateful to this school for their warm hospitality, for letting us come. I am so glad that this community especially is able to receive the warmest invitation for this particular subject, and that's so appropriate. Tonight, the Kailua Historical Society is here to be able to say Kailua's chapters of significant history are many, many more than what the book contains. If you haven't yet gotten a copy of the book Kailua, and I just remind you it would make a wonderful Christmas present for whoever you might think of, we have books available in the back. If you would like to become a member, we are welcoming you. We are all volunteers. We all are gathered together for the same purpose. As I was thinking of this program, the thought occurred to me that in Kailua's recent past, I'm talking about the last 60 years, let's say. That's recent. In the last 60 years, there have been some very electrifying moments which have brought communities together. Can you think of what they might be? All I will have to do is to mention Billy Weaver. And some of you shake your heads because you know how the community had to come together after that tragedy of him being in the water and the shark attack. I would also mention Francis Akamine, and that might ring a few bells. There was that Marine confrontation. This is all happening about 1957, 1958, and Francis, a local boy, got into a conflict with one of the Marines. And that too is part of our interesting past. And tonight, of course, we all understand why we are here, because it was this tragedy, it was this miracle that allowed the community to be electrified and united. And I just want to remind us this evening that our future is as bright as the events that we have celebrated in the past. And tonight, while we will remember there were 2 individuals killed in this tragedy, it could have been 100 times greater. It could have been so much more widespread destruction. And we are so privileged to be able to see this school goes on. In 1961, when this happened, the school had only been in existence for 7 years. And the PTA was meeting here on that night when the accident took place. And suddenly, the night skies were red. And within just a matter of seconds, there was a very different atmosphere all around this area. And then the Marines came in and they barbed it off. And they wouldn't even allow the newsmen to have access to the story. And they sealed it. And then we understand that the next morning, some of the kids who hadn't known about it, some of the kids of this school came, and they were unfortunately brought into this whole period of painful mourning. So out of the ashes have come some very beautiful things, and I am so fortunate that there are among us this night people who can remember and share their stories. I was going to put on the video that had been prepared by David Trojan, and that is basically an aviation military kind of narrative. I'm going to summarize that because we want to give the fullest time to those who are here and can tell us, where were you, what did you see, what did you feel, how has this impacted your life? And so at the very beginning, I want us to begin with those airplanes, David. There they are, those Skyhawks, and they were state-of-the-art, and several branches of the military were able to use them. In 1960, they cost about $750,000 apiece. They could fly 600 miles an hour. They have been superseded many times since then, of course. But at the time, they were state-of-the-art aircraft. And on that particular November 20 evening, there were these two pilots, Lieutenant Wright and Lieutenant Miller, 22, 23 years old, bachelors, who were in the Marines, and they had been trained, and they knew what they needed to do. It was a night practice mission, and it was all about refueling. And so about 6 o'clock in the late afternoon, they took off from Mokapu, and they were out over the water. And about an hour and 50 minutes later, the drama began to unfold because their practice mission out over the water had been fulfilled. And they were returning. And they were coming in over the water, and they were also right over the top of Waikiki. And as they were approaching for their final return to the airstrip, it was then that there was miscommunication. Who was in the lead? And Lieutenant Miller thought that he was, and Lieutenant Wright thought that he had been given the okay to be the lead pilot. And so you have a wingman suddenly becoming the number one, and they bumped each other, and that's all it took. Just that very brief moment of miscommunication. And suddenly one of the aircraft is inverted, and Lieutenant Wright has to make a very quick decision. He is coming on this kind of a flight pattern, and you can see coming over the ridge at Kailua, they suddenly were faced with a new reality. They are having to try to survive that just slight infraction of bumping in the air. And so here it was, as the wing of Lieutenant Wright, the left wing, was dipping down and his plane was out of control. And he was faced with this dilemma so quickly. He had started the ejection process according to the military records. He was going to bail. He was going to let his plane go wherever. But we believe he instantly chose the path of the hero. And he chose to bring the aircraft down, whether he was going to try to get out of the water, whether the canal or the ocean. But there was the empty schoolyard in front of him, and he chose to bring it down. We believe it was a volitional choice, and he brought it down as harmlessly as he possibly could. But in that tragedy of having to touch the earth, he bounced, he hit the first house. It was the Schmitzes, it was the Holtz, it was the Clarks, and we will be able to hear from those who were living here at that time about what had happened. We have in the back some of the newspaper clippings. Both the Advertiser and the Star Bulletin were all over this story immediately. And even though they were not given the opportunity for the first 2 hours of interviewing anybody, of looking and taking the pictures that they really wanted to, they were able to get these photographs, and you can see the rubble, the destruction, and if you have a chance and you don't live in this area, you might want to follow the trail itself as it comes right in line with the western side of the playground, which is here. This military family lost their 8-year-old son. Steven Schmitz was enrolled in the school, and at about 8:15 in the evening, he was in his bedroom. And we will let our friends who are here talk about that. He was a child who was loved by the community. I believe he was a paper boy in this area, and he was well known to everybody. There are some of his classmates who are here tonight, and they will talk also about the teachers' response and what they were trying to do in the aftermath of this tragedy. You can see the Schmitz house, the Clark's house. Perhaps some of you have known that there were some heroes who were active within just a matter of minutes. And a couple of those who were in this PTA meeting, I have names like Frank Woolley Jr. and Homer Carr and Colonel James Ashford and Marine Captain Anthony Polonis. Their names were mentioned in the newspaper articles. Those men especially went to the path of destruction. And at the Clark house, they were first of all able to find the younger of the 2 children. And that little toddler in his bed was able to be rescued. And then the older sister, Virginia. And Virginia is here this evening. Virginia, as I understand it, and you can explain to us, you were 2 years old, and you were not found immediately, and your mother was asking, "Oh, my baby, where is she?" And your mother soon was able to be embracing you and your sibling with her love. We are so grateful that you can be here. I want to identify those who were in the class with Steven Schmitz. Who was in that class? Would you please lift your hands? Okay, we have one. Do we have another one? Okay. We're going to have you come forward in a little bit. And I see you're seated there with some of the Berg family. And we will ask a couple of you also if you would be willing to come up to the platform. And we want to be able to let you tell your story. In regard to the aviation part of this dramatic unfolding, are there any questions that anybody would like to ask? I have been so appreciative of David Trojan, the military historian, who has shared his research on this subject. We did our own research, but he was able to provide, among other things, the military reports. And if any of you have a special interest in the aviation aspect of this, I invite you to come forward later and you can look at these pages. They're quite detailed and they reveal a great deal of information. The military said there were mistakes from both of the pilots. Neither one of them was totally innocent. And they both made mistakes in terms of hearing, in terms of communicating. And unfortunately, it happened so quickly that it couldn't be corrected. So those papers are here for you to look at. And on a big poster board in the back, you can also see the newspaper headlines and the photographs that are being put onto the screen right now. But we want to maximize the opportunity of conversation with these who have seen this event themselves, have lived with this event, and we want to have them speak firsthand about what it was that they were experiencing that night and what it is that they have carried with them all of their life. Let me first of all then ask who of the Burke family is able to be here. I see Brian. And wow, Elma. Elma, we are so honored that you would come. You allowed me into your home, and now you allow us the honor of seeing you in this public event. And if it would be possible, maybe you could just pull those chairs forward. And we're going to have this table put in the center. And those 6 chairs we wanted to bring out and allow whoever is here and would like to be able to share. So Brian and Elma, if you would please come forward. And yes, and this was the next door neighbor. Okay, I'm going to have you all introduce yourself when you come up. Because I don't know your names, I'm not familiar with you entirely. But thanks very much for getting this all set. And assistance in being able to get up to the platform, we will be happy to give you whatever assistance you might need.
Hey, Bill.
If you would prefer to just stay here like you are, that's fine too. We'll make sure that you have a microphone. Whatever is the easiest for you. If you can go onto the platform, that's great. This experience is all about flexibility. Like it was on that particular night in 1961. Suddenly there were new schedules and people were being called to respond in certain ways. And what I would like to do here is, first of all, I want to say thank you so much. And I will give you the microphone. But first of all, I will give you a hug and say thank you very much for coming. You tell us your full name, maybe your maiden name also. You hold that right up.
Good evening. I'm very happy to be here with seeing some old-time friends. On that night, I was at a meeting at Liberty United Church of Christ. My husband was in town playing tennis. We heard the crash. We had 3 children at home, 2 of them here right now. One of them is over in New Zealand right at this moment.
And your name?
My name is Barbara Leigh Oberholzer. My husband was Jack, and he died earlier this year. David Schmitz, who was the oldest of the Schmitz 4 children, was taking care of our children for us while we were away. When I heard that crash, we all ran out of the church. We looked down, and I saw the fire station open up, and suddenly they were on their way. I followed them all the way down to our house. We were 1222 Kailua Drive. And we saw what had happened to the little boy. And our house next door to us, the Clark's house, was just a mess. It took out our fence, and it took out the children's playhouse, and it took out a tree, and it took out a sandbox. But that's all we lost. David Schmitz was, as I said, our babysitter at that particular time. The Jeffs, who lived over on Kainalu, came over and took us all over to their house where we spent the night. I was in contact with the Schmitz for quite a few years after they left here. Francie died quite a few years ago up in Seattle. And the 2 girls, I don't know where they are now, but David went on and became a naval officer. But it was an experience that we still can recall many, many years later.
You have a wonderful story, and we're going to come back to you. Elma, let me give this to you and say how thankful we are that you can be here. I'm going to pass this over to you. And just identify yourself and say where you were that night, and we'll get back to you with the fuller.
Okay, I was much younger then. With a 9-month-old baby. She's sitting over there somewhere. And this is my son, Brian, who's 11. And we lived in 1251 Kainaloa Drive. And we were sitting around the living room. The kids were doing their homework. I had a 16-year-old son then, too. And he lives here part-time. He was a retired doctor from Queens. And daughter that lives in the Big Island, Sharon, who was a classmate of Steven Schmitz. And we just loved that little boy. When they were first starting school, he would stop by at her house and wait for Sharon to walk to school with her. And then as he got a little older, he wouldn't be bothered with girls anymore, so we kind of missed him. But she told me when I was talking to her the other day that she still has a little bracelet that he had given her that has a little clamshell on it, and she never got rid of it. So anyway, we were sitting around while the kids were doing their homework, and we heard this horrible crash, and the plane kind of whistled as it came through. And so it looked like our whole neighborhood was on fire, especially the Overholter's house. I'm sure they were gone. And so we didn't really know what happened. And my husband ran out of the house and went down the street. And he stopped. He was at Schmidt's house, and he stayed with them. And the two girls who were older than Steve were in their front bedroom, and they were tossed out of their house. And Mr. and Mrs. Schmitz were on the other side of the house, and the plane came right through the living room area, just like all our houses are similarly built over there. And they were not injured either. So my husband was over there, and he was kind of comforting them, and he brought the two older girls over to me to take care of. And we didn't know what had happened, so we didn't talk about it much. And they stayed with us until their parents came later over there to pick them up, and then we found out what had happened to little Stevie. And so the next day, because we were across the street near Kailua Street, the Marines took over the whole block from Kailua all the way up to, I guess, Kainalu, and nobody was allowed in or out, except if we lived there. So they would walk through our yard. My bedroom was right there. Day and night we'd hear them walking through. And they were, our canal at that time was just a shallow stream sort of thing, and very shallow. So the Marines would walk back and forth, up and down in the water, trying to find, I think it was a canopy from the airplane. And we would watch them. Of course, I was nervous wreck all that time. And every time we'd hear a plane, I'd go running out of the house, and that lasted for several years. We'd be having dinner, and I'd hear a plane, and up I'd go and run out. So that's how we lived for a while until that was all over. And one of the Marines, I guess he had taken off his shoes to walk in the water there, and all of a sudden he let out a yell and came out of the water with a big salmon crab clapped onto his heel. But it took us a long time to get over that, and we have never forgotten that. The kids have grown and left home and everything. But Sharon, my daughter, the big aunt, also told me that after they lost their house, the Schmitz family was renting a house across the canal from us. And so the girls would come and get in a little rowboat and row across the canal and go to school from there. And in the afternoon they could get the boat and go back home. So those are about the only things I can tell you about. Maybe my son Brian has something to add, I don't know.
That's that to Brian. Brian, from behind you here, I want to say thank you very much. There isn't enough room here for me to be. Thank you for coming. Identify yourself a little bit more, and what do you remember that particular night?
I'm Brian Burke. This is my mother. I'll give you the perspective from an 11-year-old boy. She thinks I was doing my homework. But anyway, if you've ever been on the airplane and you've listened to a C-5A Galaxy plane come in, high-pitched whine, that's the first things we heard, was that. And it just got louder and louder and louder, and it was followed by another jet. I don't know about the military part, but I think the second plane was kind of like escorting him or something, because my brother, I talked to him, he remembers looking out his window, and I remember the sound of a jet like in right next to you. It was so loud. And of course, the fireballs are going off and everything like that. He says he looked out his window and he saw the other plane in full afterburner heading out to sea. So I'm not sure if that's from his viewpoint. Other things that I remember was nobody would let me down the road for one thing, so I watched it at a distance. But my brother went down the road. My father was in and out of the scene helping with the two girls, and he remembers some things that I don't know if I'll let you know. The poor pilot, of course, was in pieces. His helmet was in the medial strip of Kainai Drive. He was still in the helmet. And in the schoolyard, the chain link fence, and the majority of the rest of his body was in that fence. And that's the stuff a 60-year-old remembers. And because he asked one of the Marines that was working there, who had some tools and a rubbish pail, what he was doing. And he says, I'm scraping his body off the wire. So, along with all these tragic events, there's still a mundane. You have to recover the body, you have to take care of the people, you have to make sure everybody is safe. But it was quite interesting walking to school. I was behind the barbed wire with the 50 caliber machine gun, and then that was a very traumatic thing. And it was as if, I can remember a lot of it as if it was yesterday. But my mother told pretty much the whole story, so I don't have much else to add other than that. And one other thing maybe I should add is that Steven Schmitz was a cool kid. He was a great little boy. He was over at our house quite a bit. And my father used to call him Steamboat, after, I think, a cartoon character or something. But I think now that we've gotten older, we've run into some other people. He was quite a woman's man because he had young little girls claiming him to be their boyfriend, all over this area of Kailua. So he was a really nice boy, and it's very sad that he was unable to survive the crash. And I gotta just say one other thing too for that pilot. I mean, pretty brave thing to do, to know that you're gonna meet your end, but you want to make that plane as least damaging as it could. And just have to say that I'm grateful for his skill in being able to do that. And what aftermath of that, as far as the Marine base goes, they stopped flying over this area. Before that time, they're always flying over Kailua, all the time. After that crash, they haven't. The only ones that have flown over that way have been the Blue Angels. That's about it.
We know there's more, Brian, and we'll come back to you. Let me say thank you so much. Sorry I have to find you here. I'll give them to you. Just tell us your name, your full name.
Shelley Wiggins, Woodward now. I actually live about a block away from school, walk to school every day, and Steven was a classmate and a ladies' man even then, yes. Luckily I ran faster than he did, so. What I remember most is we were all, my whole family was at the dining table when this happened, and my dad is a federal aviation air traffic controller, and our first thought was that it was like World War III. That's what we were thinking, or I was. All of our practice in school, getting under the table and that kind of stuff. But very quickly, my father figured out what was going on, and we just said a prayer right away for whoever had been involved in it, especially the pilot. And we heard stories which I thought weren't true, but now Brian has confirmed it about the pilot and Steven. Our class, as a group, with the teacher's guidance, got a book about, if I remember right, the book was about accepting death, because the whole class had to accept this. And we had all our names in it, and I think it's still in the library, I'm not sure. And I think they also presented one to his family. So it's a childhood memory. It was a mystery, you know, with all the barbed wire and keeping the newspaper out. As a child, I didn't know all the details, and actually I'm learning more about it tonight. So anyway, I'm glad I'm here tonight.
Hi, I'm Virginia Clark. I'm the 2-year-old that they found in the last house. Of course, I don't remember any of it, but of course I've heard many, many stories. And I've been told many times about the men that came over from the PTA meeting and saved me, so to say. So I'm very grateful for that. And very grateful that my parents were able to stay in the same house all this time too, just like the Burks and all that. So, but there's so many things I wanted to say now I can't remember. My mom passed away like in 2008, and she had lifelong injuries from the plane crash, and so that was a memory that she had for a long time. So of course that reminded us of the plane crash also. And I do remember what I was going to say. I don't remember too much about the rescue on that, but I just totally lost everything I was going to say. I'm sorry.
You're allowed that special moment. We who are seniors, we have that all the time. And we don't even apologize for it. I want to have Chris, who called me this afternoon, I want to have him stand. Here he is. Chris, would you also identify yourself, and if you can come up or just turn around wherever you, right there where you are, and just let people know who you are. Because Chris called me this afternoon and he said, I'm really intrigued with this gathering.
Well, I read the article, and of course I remembered it because me and my mother and my brother were driving into Kailua. We just come up Kainui Drive and taking a left on Kainalu.
We are seniors, Chris, and you're going to have to shout.
And we'd just taken a left on Kainalu Drive, and we weren't even past the schoolyard yet. And I was, I guess, 9 years old, bored 9-year-old, looking out the back window of our old Vauxhall. And all of a sudden I saw a Kailua plane. I don't know how high it was just huge. And I started screaming at my mother to turn around and go back. And before they could even turn their head, it just went right back down. But we turned around and went back. And as I remember it, there was only one other person there by that time. And we didn't have any idea what had happened. Because the plane, of course, had come in and hit the canal bank and gone through 2 houses, so we didn't see the plane. I didn't see the plane actually come down, but I saw the column of fire. And by the time the whole neighborhood got out there, we'd realized what had happened. I don't know how long we stayed there, but by the time we got home, we lived directly across the canal, just one house over from the Schmitz, directly across. And my father had been in the carport there. He said he heard it coming and he looked up and he saw a plane clear the neighbor's house about 10 feet above it, and slam into the canal bank, and then it bounced up, went through the Schmitz house, lost its wings there, skidded across the road, went through the other house, hit the chain link fence, which pretty much stopped it. It stripped everything off, including the, of course, cockpit and the pilot. And it was, I don't remember thinking of it as being real horrible. I was so young. I remember climbing on the fence and pointing out body parts. I think I pointed out a couple of things, and my brother pulled me off the fence and said, "That's about enough of that." And that's about all I remember. I didn't remember the Marines taking over the area or anything. I remember them from our vantage point on the other side of the canal, wading through the water, because we figured the plane had lost its landing gear and undercarriage there. Knew it had lost its wings going through the first house where Steven was killed. But that was about it. So those were my memories of it.
Thank you so much, Chris. Chris explained to me on the phone that he was on his way to, well, he's come back here. I guess you're going to move to the Big Island. And we wish you well in your new home. And I want to ask, too, if there is anybody else who would like to identify, would you be able to come forward, please? Because maybe you know some of the others who are here, but I might not recognize who you are, but identify yourself and share with us.
I'm Diane Libby, and I was their neighbor. And my dad saw the plane coming down in the kitchen, and he started screaming at us because the plane was heading for our house. And of course, we didn't hear him. I was doing my homework. My brother was in the shower. My sister, I don't know where she was tiny. And my mother was in the bedroom. And next thing I knew, my window in my bedroom blew out. And I thought World War III started. But my dad realized the Smith's house was hit really bad, and he ran over and saved Frank because the house had collapsed. And the only thing that was really helping was the refrigerator that actually saved them. And my mother ran out and says, "Oh my God, the house is on fire," so she tried to take the hose. But Steven was a wonderful friend. We played kickball, and he was so full of life. I'll never forget him.
Thank you so much. Is there anybody else here? Yes. Are you Kanani?
I'm the other older child.
I'm Lonnie.
We look alike. I'm Barbara Obolter's daughter. We lived right next door, and she said David, Steven's older brother, was babysitting us. So my sister and I were in bed, and I heard this gigantic boom. And he rushed in there, grabbed us. My brother was just a little kid, grabbed all three of us and took us outside. And his intention was to take us to his home, where he thought it would be safer. And when we got out the house, there was just fire everywhere. And somehow I remember wires, but I don't know if there's wires on Kainui, telephone wires. But everything was hanging down. There were just fires all over. And he was going to take us there to take care of us. And thank God, another family grabbed us and let him go to his family and find his family. But it was a traumatic night, and it smelled like smoke for a long, long time. Yeah, that's the impression I really remember.
Thank you so much. And your brother. You must have memories too.
Well, my name is Carl Oberholter. I was 6 at the time, and we had just gone down for bed. And I I thought I heard this screaming sound like you had described. And then all of a sudden, I don't remember a noise, but I remember looking out the window, and then the window had just filled with fire. And I thought I was dreaming. And if I can describe it to you, it'd be like when you're a small kid and your eyes are itchy and you rub your eyes and you get all those images in your eye. It's like that, but it was red. Just red like that. And then before I knew it, the door flew open. David grabbed me. We ran out on the street. We get out on the street, or in the yard, and it was like surreal. There was just these pockets of fire everywhere, and the smell of like jet fuel and oils was everywhere. And people were just kind of walking around in a daze. And we were there for a while, and then like my mother said, we went over to the Jeff's house. And this is when I got scared. Because when I was there at the Jeff's house, being 6 years old, all the sirens from the ambulances and from the fire trucks were coming. And every one of them sounded like another plane. And so I was just freaking out, and nobody knew why. But I was saying, it's another plane, it's another plane. And I thought we were just getting bombarded by planes. I wasn't thinking about war. You know, I was too young to think about that. I just thought it was another crashing plane. When we finally went back to the house, and there's some pictures back there, and you saw them up here too, you'll see the tail of the plane in the backyard. Well, when I saw that, I thought that was so cool. And so I asked my dad if we could keep that. And he said, no, we can't have that. So to this day, I have these strong memories of this thing, you know, and we just drove by here now on the way and to look at it. And every time I drive by, I always think about that experience.
It's wonderful for you to share. Is there another one who would like? Mary Jane.
I don't want to come up there. I have a loud voice.
Mary Jane Helbred.
I live on Uli and my two older children were asleep, and my husband was trying to get the 3-year-old to sleep in the front room, and I was in my kitchen, and when this horrendous boom came out, my husband says, "That's bigger than breaking the sound barrier." And so we thought, what on earth? And then from my kitchen window, I could see this fire coming right at us. It skimmed over the back part of our house, over the neighbor's house, and I thought it was going to come right through us. And then it went on over and hit the canal bank and then on over. But like Brian said, in the late 50s and the early 60s, we just had a constant swoop of jets over our whole neighborhood. Constantly, all day long. I could be at my clothesline, and they would be so low that you would see the shadows on the ground. And then after that, the community got into such an uproar that they made them change their flight patterns.
Thank you, Mary Jane. Is there, yes, Alan? Do you need the microphone, Alan?
No, just very short.
Just real loud.
One just made it about changing the pattern. Obviously, they had a right-hand pattern in 1961. You will notice the new pattern, which was changed. The aircraft now have a left-hand pattern, which means the aircraft come in over the sandbar, in effect do a turn around Coconut Island, and it's a left pattern all the way. So that's the net result of the earlier observations.
Thank you very much. As I've looked at the records, it appears that this particular incident has changed quite a number of military policies, as well you might expect that it would. I think that there were 4 editorials in the newspapers immediately after, and they were all calling on what the neighborhood had already spoken about changes that needed to be made. And you've heard some of them that have already been described. I want to invite Rosen Devlin to come forward and to share with us a little bit of a different take on this. Rosen has been so very helpful. She lives here in this community. And Rosen told me that she had a friend who was a writer. And this writer had written a memoir, and that writer now lives on the Big Island. And I'm going to give this to you. You can identify her.
Okay. My friend Mary Tullis Hudak grew up across the canal on that hillside. Her father was a Marine and her mother was a former Marine. I didn't know we had women Marines in World War II, but her mother is still living at almost 97. And I love to hear her tell stories of World War II. So Mary, in her retirement, is writing short stories. And she said, Rosen, I think you'd like to read this story because it happened in your neighborhood. I moved to Kainui 20 years ago, but I live next to the Schmitz house and across from the Clark house. So I was interested, but I couldn't believe it. And I started speaking to neighbors and finding out a little bit about it, and went to the library and did some research. So I'm just going to read a little bit of her story. It starts in the spring before the accident, when she says, she's talking, as you did, Shelley, about all the preparation being done at school. We had weekly drills about what to do if there was an enemy attack. The air raid siren sounded and we jumped up, pushed all our desks against the windows, crawled underneath the desks and covered our eyes with our hands. We did not want to be blinded by the flash that would happen when the bomb hit the ground. They had seen movies about it and about how cockroaches would be what was left. Some parents came to school and said that their children were having nightmares, so the weekly drills were cut back to monthly drills. Spring drifted into summer and school was out for 3 months. And then in the fall, she was a 6th grader. I practiced my enemy attack drills at home. I kept reading the headlines in the newspaper. I tried to understand why the leaders of all the countries were always in such a bad mood, that they wanted to kill everyone so that the cockroaches could be the only living things left. She saw on TV, I guess, Khrushchev hitting the desk, and she thought he was trying to kill cockroaches. It happened on November, she says 21st, but we know it was the 20th, right? 1961, it was in the newspaper on the 21st. Bullwinkle and friends were on TV. I didn't like Bullwinkle because he was stupid and had a funny sounding voice. I decided that I would go outside, sit in the grass and watch the stars. In the evening, the scary daytime newspaper stories and the enemy attack drills were vague and muffled. Of course, the jets that trained at the Marine Corps station nearby occasionally fractured the tranquil nights, but I didn't hear any that evening. That night there were lots of stars out. I loved the evenings in the yard, the sweetness of plumeria, the lemony fragrance of pacalana. I was alone and the world smelled right. Nobody was going to attack Kailua, at least not that night. I jerked my head as I heard a faraway pop. The popping sound came from the sky, and I knew that they were Kaneohe Air Station's jets, but the sound was different. I saw the red lights on one jet move away, getting smaller. The other jet started making louder pops. It got brighter and closer, coming down out of the sky. I stood up, but my feet felt nailed to the ground. Suddenly the jet was so close, I thought it was going to hit the ground on our street. And then the sky erupted in red. The smell of gasoline, jet fuel, metal, and burning palm trees was thick. I could taste the smells. The sound pierced through my gut and I fell back down in the grass. The red turned to orange, to black, and to red again. Small explosions went on for a few minutes. I could not move. I stared at the flames. I couldn't see exactly what had happened, but I knew it had happened.
says in her memoir, "The night the sky turned red," and that's from Mary Hudak.